episode of Codename New to Vero 2. I'm your presenter, Shabu Are You. So what happens when you have two 80s titans come together? And those two titans are Nintendo and G.I. Joe. Well, surprisingly, you have something that came out in 1991. So why did it take so many years for Nintendo and G.I. Joe to come out with the video game? And here's the other issue. And if a lot of you retro gamers may attest to this, I mean, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have anything. So we used to trot down to the stores with our, birthday money, wherever. We see Rambo, we see RoboCop, and we put down the $50 to buy the games. And then when we bring it back, those games stink. And I referenced the Angry Video Game Nerd on YouTube for those reviews. And he's spot on, because I do remember, I'm a retro game collector as well, and I do have Rambo, I do have Airwolf, I do have Commando is pretty good, but Back to the Future, all of these iconic either movie or TV shows that transitioned to the NES did not fare well. So, did G.I. Joe suffer the same fate? We'll go into depth about that as well, so stick around. The G.I. Joe video game, simply known as G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, was released in 1991 by Taxon. It's important to point out that that was the end of the NES run, as Super Nintendo was set to launch in 91. A follow-up to this title was released a few months afterwards. Taxon actually went bankrupt, so Capcom took over. Yes, that Capcom known for Mega Man and Street Fighter 2 picked up the sequel, but we'll talk about that in a little later episode. And it's important to note that despite it being a 1991 release, the 1989 line was primarily featured. We have Tiger Force Duke, Rock and Roll version 2, Snake Eyes version 3, the 91 Hawk version 3, in 1988 Blizzard, and in 1990 Captain Gridiron. Now I'm using the NES Mini just for presentation purposes, and it appears a lot better that way. I'm not going to go into how I went about doing that, but I do have the card as well and the old NES console. So we begin with this game with Hawk in his version 3, with that crazy headgear that he has going over the objectives of the mission. The game is a side-scroller, so it's pretty straightforward. And there's a lot of things a lot of side-scrollers do wrong, but you're going to see that this game is really well done, really entertaining. So it doesn't have the problems that a lot of side-scrollers have. The other thing I think from the holdup is that Hasbro felt that video games were a direct competition to them. So I think that's why we didn't get a G.I. Joe video game in the zenith of the NES cycle. And then we got these at the very end of the Nintendo cycles, because I think Hasbro held out for such a long time of committing to a video game, thinking that it's a competition to the console. Now, you see here I have Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes his gun isn't really strong in this game. I like Duke's Rock and Roll's gun, but Snake Eyes has great jumping ability. So you could switch between characters as you go through them, and switch between hand-to-hand or their gun specialties. They all have different levels, so it's good to, as you go through the game, know your character and know their strengths and weaknesses. Alright, so what I'm doing here is just doing a quick playthrough of the first stage, just for everybody to get an idea, to remember. Again, this is a really fun game, and I was actually surprised. I vaguely remember it. I was one of those kids that jumped on Sega and then anticipated to Super Nintendo. So this kind of got pushed back in a lot of people's minds, and this is unfortunate because it's such a good game compared to all those other 80 titles. So here we're going to a boss stage, and you power up real quick, and it's important on each boss stage to know your strengths of your characters. And we have the Condor here, the Cobra Condor, which is kind of cool. And again, like I was saying, it's good to know your characters and their strengths and weaknesses. So I'm using Duke, and you see I'm switching back and forth between rock and roll because his gun is the strongest, obviously. So it breaks apart. The other thing is, like, I kind of like those strobe flashings. It does bring another dimension into the game. Some people find that annoying, or if you have a seizure, you're susceptible to that. I wouldn't recommend playing this game. So we completed the first stage. I don't know if that's supposed to be Cobra Commander, so this is 1-2. Again, just to get an idea of the stage layout. This stage is actually really cool, and you get to go. The final boss is Raptor, but you have to plant bombs and set up timing bombs in this stage. They did a really good job designing this game, and we're gonna do the other game in another episode, the follow-up to this, but it's pretty much the same flow of it. So now this is the part where the game has been beaten, and I wanted to show the credits and everything because it's kind of cool. It does the summary of all the bosses and all the characters, and you're gonna see all the and it's good because sometimes it's tough to distinguish who is who. I mean, of course, the Condor is easy to pick out, but some of the other characters, it's kind of like, Raptor is pretty straightforward. But it's tough to distinguish who is who. And this one appears in the second game too. The Cobra Sea Ray. And this boss also appears in the second G.I. Joe game. It's important to get the timing of each boss, like in any Nintendo game. It's all about, there's a pattern to each boss that you need to memorize, and then you use your team to adequately prepare and go back and forth and toggle between your lineup to maximize your desired outcome of victory. And Hawk is only playable at the very end. He's the only character that you see him, he talks, but at the very end he'll pop up, and it's imperative that you utilize him at the final stage to face against none other than Cobra Commander. Road Pig. It's weird that they had Rapture and Voltar as boss too. So the Dreadnoks are represented, as well as Destro's Iron Grenadiers. Globulus is in there. I mean, wow. Destro sucked. He was tough as anything. Here we go. The last boss. And he's wearing his... I mean, is this Cobra Commander? Because he's wearing the battle armor. And there we go at the end credits. The Joe team successfully defeating Cobra. If you write down that code, you could use it. Well, anyway, that's my recap of the G.I. Joe video game.